Hello, and welcome to the fifth episode of IT with Fatima. And today is our last part of the brief history of computing. So, welcome. And where did where did we where did we end our last podcast? It was 1960s. So we'll continue from there.
Yeah, we're still kind of different computers to what we
Right,
know as computers today.
right. And continuing from the 1960s, let's go straight to the 1965, where the first integrated circuit computer, the PDP-8, from Digital Equipment Corporation appeared.
Yeah,
So
we're starting
what
to
is that?
get towards kind of companies and architectures that I'm actually familiar with, like literally having been used. Like DEC used to be a big company that had to do with kind of old style of computers, was later bought by Compaq. But I think the the thing here, the big change here was this idea of an integrated circuit. That's kind of the change. And maybe just use a couple of minutes in trying to understand why. Well,
Right. So what
previous,
changed? Why
yeah.
was say
So originally the physical computer back in Babbage's age was switches and gears and stuff. And then the next step was the electronic computer, where we started to use vacuum tubes. And then we got rid of vacuum tubes once we got to transistors. But transistors still are these, discrete things. They're like the size of the head of a pen. Yeah. Now with IC technology, what happened was that we were starting to be able to create these ICs that had a lot of transistors on them in a microscopic scale. So we literally can't even, see the individual transistors in a picture like this. So
very
that's the
fine-tuned engineering.
sorry.
Very fine-tuned engineering. So very like detailed, very you have to
Yeah,
be this is a big step from Babbage's age, like you mentioned.
yeah, you can just kind of see the individual lines as they go here um, across. That those would have been wires originally. And you can kind of see the complexity that we're getting into here as well. And this is a fairly small, fairly old IC chip, right? So this is not state of the art
Right.
by any means.
And it's by the way, the PDP stands for programmable data processor. And
Yep.
pretty quickly after this, the real revolution in computer cost and size began. So after this, the mass production of computers or microcomputers started to happen due to the technology evolving so fast. All right, and in 19 now we're you want to still mention something from this?
No, I think we're okay. Yeah.
All right. And then we're continuing on to the 1970s and integrated circuits. So by the early 70s, the state of the art in computer technology allowed 1,000 components. You can tell a little bit more about what the content of this means. So 1,000 components per chip. And to get an idea of that's how much it has shrunk. Is there, we were talking earlier about the whirlwind computer, just to show the idea of how quickly the evolution of these technologies
this is
from the big machines to the very small circuits happened.
so we have like a memory unit here. This is what it looks like. You can see the vacuum tubes here at the top. And this is a 16 kilobyte memory unit. And the scale of this is that this is the 2 meters high. So what? 7 feet, right? So it's like taller than me. So across this would roughly be like person sized, this front panel, a little bit larger. So one 16 kilobyte memory unit would take up that amount of memory, that amount of space. Whereas with an IC, it's literally kind of microscopically available on chip. You can't by your naked eye even see what the
So
individual
from that,
components are.
from the picture to this, from the
Yeah.
2 meter tall thingy, we go from there to this very small microscopic circuit. That's pretty.
Yeah, and a lot of times you see these ICs, they look like this here on the right-hand side. So there are these kind of ants or caterpillars that have these legs that they're standing on. That's not the IC. That's just the casing. That's just made big, so it's easy to connect those legs individually to different parts.
So
The
this is
IC
the case where
is
you put the
yeah.
circuit.
So then inside that kind of casing, there's a much smaller die. That's literally, well, it depends on the chip, but like millimeters times millimeters. And just as an example here, we have one die that is actually has, besides having 128 bytes of RAM and 2 kilos of EPROM, also has a CPU on it and some input-output functionality. And that's kind of literally the size of a very small coin, maybe a 1 cent coin, or half of that of a 1 cent coin. So like under 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So it's a
And
huge
how
change
fast?
in size.
When did
Yeah.
when did we have the big computer? It's not like there was 100 years between this. It was just decades.
Yeah.
The evolution
literally.
happened in decades, which is it's hard to understand for someone who comes outside from the field, and to understand even engineering that goes into the getting the 2 meter thing into the microscopic integrated circuit. That's
Yeah, it's
and this is decades. This is so in between the
and
big machines,
it kind
the
of
small circuit.
continues. If I can just kind of just quickly. So like in 64, what we had on a single IC was stuff like 1 to 10 transistors and 1 to 12 logic gates. Logic gates is something that we need to be able to use to create logic, to make, and or how to do maths, basically in binary. So from 64, 4 years later already, we're talking about 10 to 50 times the amount of transistors on a chip. And then again, 3 years later, it's now 500 to 20,000. And now we're in the millions. Right?
So
it's the change scale is always exponential in this field.
right. And to compare this to the where in the previous episodes we were kind of seeing the evolution between longer periods. Could you say, is it true? Do you think it's true that it's kind of more rapid, the evolution of both the
Literally.
hardware and kind of our
nowadays, I guess nowadays your washing machine has more computing power than the big supercomputers in the 40s.
which is and this is again decades. So it's amazing to think that to get from the big supercomputers, in which that time was the height of computer science, the height of the inventions, the height of the brain power of the scientists back in then, to this day where you carry a phone which is way more powerful, faster than the supercomputers in the 1940s, if I'm correct. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah, and in here it's kind of like so today's chips, which are 64-bit, and the size is about like 1/16 times 1/8 inches. And it contains 250 transistors. Had all the computing power of ENIAC computer, which we mentioned in previous episode.
This was the first chip by Intel in the 60s, right? That you're talking about. So
we're talking about the
4004.
first microprocessor. In the 1971, the first microprocessor chip, which was 4-bit chip, was invented, found, how do we say? And it really did have all the computing power of the ENIAC computer, which is pretty amazing, if I'm correct here, I think.
So here you can see a picture of the chip in the casing, right? So like I said, it looks a little bit like a caterpillar or something with the legs here. And you can actually see a blown up picture. So this is the actual chip inside that casing, right? So you can see the little bit of the legs here at the top. And this is like roughly a quarter of a 1 cent, 1 euro cent chip, coin. So like you said, very, very, very small, under 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter. And it already, this is like ridiculous for now, for our kind of purposes, right?
Right.
It's a 4-bit chip.
Right.
And 740 kilohertz. And,
right. And it matched the first microprocessor chip, matched IBM computers of the early 60s, whose CPU, the central processing unit, size was about size of a table, or not a big table, but like a washing machine. Right. So that's pretty amazing. So the evolution has been very, very rapid, very fast, very fast. And then we are still in the 1970s. Now we're going into the 1975, and Altair 8800, which was it was this first low-cost microprocessor computer, which had just became commercially available. So after the kind of like evolution of the microprocessor chip, obviously this open up a lot of possibilities to bring the computers from the back of the army cellars to your home, which was obviously the next step that started happening. And Altair 8800 is one of the first steps toward our laptops today.
Yep. So just kind of looking at the wiki page here quickly. So this is what the casing looks like, and just kind of remember that this was back in the days. This was marketed via magazines, right? So back then, that was how kind of specialist fields would communicate.
Yes, and it was Popular Electronics magazine who made an article about Altair 8800.
So you could buy this as a mail order thing, and you wouldn't get it assembled, or I guess you could later get it assembled as well. But originally, it came in a kind of a kit, do it yourself. You finish it yourself once it gets to your home.
Right. So Altair 8800 was one of the first steps toward you and me speaking on live stream with our laptops.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to get my co-host here.
No worries.
All right.
Here we have a picture of the issue of Popular Electronics.
I like the design. It's very retro.
Yeah, but it was really groundbreaking at the time, right? So I did not read this issue, so I'm not that
right.
Almost.
If we ever start our own technology-focused magazine, we can kind of like use the same design. Looks cool. So what seems kind of, I'm not sure if this is true, but looking at the materials that I've seen, kind of, it seems like computing or microcomputers were kind of like this niche thing of people who are interested in computers and or have studied computer science. And it really, I don't think people at that time thought that just decades later it would kind of their niche thing would be part of every field that we now know that we like every field of the modern days, healthcare, banking. If you have like a clothing store, you probably promote it in some sort of software platform or social media. So that's cool. And again, the evolution from the niche magazines where Altair 8800 was promoted to this today, where everybody basically has a computer, or at least has access to some sort of computer.
Yeah, so back then, this kind of home electronics stuff was fairly popular. So people who would be geeks, the same people who nowadays have, I guess, computers, would back then be building all kinds of devices like radios from electronics parts, like doing amateur radio stuff, talking to people around the world that way, and so on. So I guess that was kind of the main market for the microcomputers, and that's also why they were very often sold in this kind of kit fashion. So you had to do the final assembly yourself because that's how you did things back then. But like I said, yeah, like you said, a very big difference compared to how we perceive computers now back to then.
Imagine if you had to build your phone, like instead of like getting the phone or your laptop, you had to really build it from the.
And it's the size of a beer crate.
Right. All right. So during then we're continuing from the 1975 and Altair 8800 to late 1970s to early 1980s, which was kind of like a big boom in this was kind of like the time where there was a lot of computing technology based companies that came and went. I think back in that time, people really saw the potentials of this field and kind of like tried to really, what always happens when something becomes popular, people are trying to cash in. So it makes sense that a lot of companies came and went, lots of movement in them in the area. So and by the way, fun fact, what I found from the material is that back in the day, the microcomputers what was called microcomputers in order to make a difference from the mainframes, which some people refer to as real computers. And this is what I think that happens with every field. There's like a niche, and people are like, "This is my niche," and when it becomes popular, the people who were in there the first time kind of like have to make a difference that, hey, this was ours the first time. We knew our computers are not your computers. It's not the same, which is kind of like very human thing too.
And it's also a very different use case, right? So the real big computers, they were owned by, the military, big companies or maybe universities. Whereas these microcomputers, were kind of available for anyone. They were still quite expensive, but kind of as a hobby, it was, you could buy one.
Right. Do we still to this day kind of like we don't really say if we hear a supercomputer or your laptop, we don't really need to make a difference. We don't say that, oh, the real computers and then this your hobby thing. Or do people, or maybe this is just again a view. This is what it looks like for me as someone who's not a computer scientist or doesn't really isn't really that familiar. So do people say
just a quick transition here. So as it happens, the microcomputer architecture, so the way that we will see now that microcomputers have been created, is actually how all computers are created nowadays. Right? So back then, people would still think that this is this kind of a hobby way of doing things, but then we have the real computers, the business use case over there. And basically, due to that kind of popularity of that computer architecture, mainly popularized by Intel, we nowadays don't say microcomputers anymore, because that's actually the computers that we have. However, we still have large business computers as well. And nowadays we call them mainframes. So mainframe computing is like a large business computer that is not based on microcomputers. So it doesn't, the software that you would run on your server based on microcomputers would not work over there. It's a totally different
right. So there's actually a use. It's not just that people want to make a difference in order to keep their niche to themselves, but there's really it's useful to make a distinction from the microcomputers versus the mainframes.
Yeah, and I think you're right that in the beginning that was the idea, that these are very small computers. But then it kind of got standardized. But the way that the microcomputer works was the same everywhere. And that basically, removed that, or made the distinction more important than just a label. It actually means something.
Right. And the first, the kind of like the first microcomputers, or the microcomputers in the late 1970s, early 1980s. A few to mention: Commodore 64, Atari, and Radio Shack's TR-80, and then of course Apple. And
yeah, so a lot happened in this time.
a lot happened. This is very, like I said, this is a brief history of computing. There's a lot of things that happened there, but I think we have to show the Apple, because the Apple One.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
What did it look like?
ZX Spectrum. So this is the Trinity that came out. This is the Apple II already. So let's go back one step to Apple One.
Yeah, we have to.
This is where was we had a good picture of those two.
Yeah, we had it was in the it was in let me show you.
I got it.
Oh, you found it.
Yeah, I think it was here, right?
Yeah, it was there. It was there. Definitely, it was there. Yeah, there.
Yeah, here we go.
Wozniak completes the Apple One.
Yeah,
and this is how it looked like.
On the right-hand side, so is Apple One, and you can see that it's basically just an IC board plated onto a wooden casing, and Wozniak has even signed this one here at the top. And then compare that to the Apple II.
Yeah.
left-hand side.
And what I have to mention about Apple too is that it was the most successful of the early microcomputers, and designed and built by Steve Wozniak. And then
Yeah.
the person who we often associate with Apple is Steve Jobs, which was actually just a good friend of Steve Wozniak's, kind of
Yeah,
like
I
a buddy.
remember, like from their biography, I remember that Steve Jobs was working for Atari. Atari back at the days was making these coin-operated arcade games, right? And with those, like you go to an arcade and then you put in €2 and you get to play it. And they had like a problem of their hardware design using too many chips. So Atari promised to Steve Jobs, who was like, I think in high school at the time, that they'll pay him a $100 bonus for every chip that they can take off away from the motherboard, because it would make production so much cheaper. And then he went to Steve Wozniak to because he was more of a hardware guy, and then made a deal so that they'll split it 50-50. And in the end, Wozniak was able to remove a huge number of chips, but Steve Jobs never actually gave him half of the money. He just gave him some $350 instead of 2,500 or something like that, and just kept the rest for himself.
I think this is very important to know, because Steve Jobs is someone who we really associate with Apple, and Steve Wozniak, who actually has built and designed the first Apple computers, is often left behind, kind of like the other guy. So Steve Jobs was a friend, a computer nerd friend, a more business savvy friend, I think. And together, they kind of like combined Steve Wozniak's knowledge and skills with kind of like Steve Jobs' way of working in the market, making things seem more desirable to masses, I think. And that's why it got so successful. But it wasn't because of Steve Jobs' work, but it was kind of like Steve Wozniak who made
especially in the beginnings. Then later on, when Apple grew, of course, it was Steve Jobs' vision that he very often kind of told people that the way to do things, and later on we can see that very often he was actually correct in probably intuitively.
I think I just wanted to highlight Steve Wozniak here.
But was definitely in the beginning, he was the engineering brains behind Apple.
Yeah, and obviously Steve Jobs, like you said, it's his vision, but Apple wouldn't be Apple without Steve Wozniak. And to mention, from the company Apple, it took only 3 years from when it was started to get from zero to earning over 100 million. And that's, like it said in the materials that I found, not bad for dropout computer geeks.
Yeah, they both at that time, I think they were dropouts from university. Or I don't know if Steve even started yet, but at least was a dropout from university. He actually went back into university and finished his degree like 10 years later. But yeah, that's actually good. But this actually happens very often in the industry, that the people who are driving these kind of the pioneers happen to be dropouts. It's just like they're too interested; they can't finish their degree.
Yeah, and it's very inspirational, I think, to a lot of people who have had struggle with, like myself, for example. I think it's always inspirational to hear that people who haven't actually gone to the very traditional route of finishing their schools and really being the top of their class can actually be the leaders in some field. Although I wouldn't say, like I said, that the emphasis is like, how would I say this? This doesn't take anything away from the fact that going to traditional paths of academic, the ways that we are shown when we are smaller, it's not saying that it isn't right. It's more of saying that instead of kind of like thinking it that you just have to always do this in order to be successful, we can see evidence. This is an evidence from that it doesn't always have to be the case. But I still highlight, like, for example, to our kids, I would never say, yeah, drop out of high school or drop out of college. You can become something great, but obviously you have to educate yourself in order to know more. And I think it's important to note that Steve Wozniak also finished his degree.
Yeah, later on. Yeah.
Later on.
Yeah. So the Apple II was also fairly successful in education. So Apple, I think, at least they give a huge discount, or they might have even given away a lot of these machines to schools, which was kind of smart marketing idea already at that time. So there's a lot of things happening here at the same time as Apple II came out. Also, the Commodore PET came out, which was the first kind of real proper computer from Commodore, who then kind of became a home computing name for a while. And then similarly, Tandy had the TRS-80. This was basically Radio Shack. So they had a distribution network already. And what people are saying here in Wikipedia, which is also pretty much true, is that what happened simultaneously was this idea of ready-made software, right? So the previous computers, they didn't have any screens. They only had these lights at the front panel. So you could only really do like a calculator or something like that with them. There's no point in using them for anything proper. But these had screens. So you were able to do stuff like word processing with them. And then the first real killer app is spreadsheets. Because previously, when you would work with spreadsheets, it would be by hand. And then you would need to, remove an old value and then put it back in,
right.
Usually manual.
What was the first computer with a screen?
Well, that, I don't know. It's already way ages
So
ago.
if we follow my notes, the next or the materials that I've been through and based my notes on the materials, not taking any credit here because this is a very unfamiliar field to me. But in 1981, IBM produced their first microcomputer, and then after that, pretty quickly after that, the microcomputer explosion happened, which means that a lot of companies started to produce their own computers, and there was this slogan used: computers by the millions for the millions. And comparing to ENIAC, microcomputers of the 80s were 20 times faster. For example, Apple II ran at the speed of 1/4 megahertz and had a memory capacity of 16 times larger than ENIAC 64K. It's way more reliable and consumed the power of a light bulb instead of a train, and were one of 30,000 of the size and cost one of the 10,000 as much in comparable dollars. So an Apple II with a full 64K of RAM cost about $1,200 in 1977, and then that's about $8,000 to $10,000 nowadays. So still relatively expensive. And And then in 1983, we have Lisa, which is the first personal computer with the GUI, or graphical user interface.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
So if you go just a little bit backwards, just a couple of highlights.
All right.
So the PC, the IBM PC that you mentioned came out in 81. That's kind of the architecture that won, right? So nowadays, pretty much all computers are using the same kind of architecture than the IBM PC. But there were plenty of other kind of contestants for the home market specifically. So you said the Commodore 64 was one big game machine, at least. It was also, they tried to sell it for kind of home business users, but in the end, it was a gaming machine. Of course, we know what came after the Commodore 64 was then the Amiga and the Atari. And these were both based on the Motorola 68000 CPU. So both the early Commodores and then also the Atari ST were based on that. That's actually the CPU that Lisa made. So Lisa was kind of the first proper customer for that specific CPU. And the usage boomed. It was used everywhere. It's actually still used. Like stuff like the current printers work with that CPU. So it's still being produced. It's a huge hit for Motorola as a CPU producer back then. But yeah, this is what Lisa looked like, and it had a GUI, right? So previously everything was working based on a text and keyboard, no Windows, no nothing. And this had a GUI, and actually, this was the idea of a graphical user interface was stolen by Apple from Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. So
Really?
they actually invented it already in the 70s. And they also saw that. So I think it was Steve Jobs who went there, who actually saw that in Xerox PARC. I think we already have it here somewhere. Like in the 70s, there was a mention of Xerox. Yeah, here, Xerox Alto. This was the
So
actual
they had
first
it
one.
there.
Yeah, but this never made it into being mass produced. This was just from a research center, right?
Right.
So maybe the time was not correct then, back in the 70s, but once we got to the 80s, it started to be more usable.
Right. And like I said, it's important to note that this is the first mass marketed microcomputer with a graphical user interface. So we see that it has been done before, but it's just not for masses. Right. A lot of interesting facts coming from our Apple founder, Steve Jobs.
Yeah. So Lisa itself was actually a commercial disaster. They lost so much money with it. The whole company almost went bust because of that. But then they kind of created the Macintosh, which is this one.
Right.
And somehow they were able to change some of the part and make very good marketing. And Apple, as we know nowadays, is basically thanks to the Macintosh.
Right. And it says here in my notes, based on the materials I've found, which we will include here. So 1984 to 1989. It says here that 1984 Macintosh, the first mass-produced, commercially available computer with a graphical user interface, really hit off. And then, like you said, Apple, I think, has to kind of like give credit to their success to, or the success goes all the way back into this 1984 and production of Macintosh. So Lisa wasn't really a hit, like you said. I think maybe it has something to do with the fact that they didn't credit the idea to someone. This is just
Could
obviously
be,
it
could be.
doesn't work like that. But lesson learned: if you're inspired by something or someone, always credit them.
Yeah.
Okay, and then continuing forward to 1998. No,
89.
1989, and Windows 1.1 for the PC. Can we say that PC is short for personal computer? That's true, right?
Yeah. So originally, that's kind of IBM's take on what the personal computer should be, right? That's the IBM PC. So of course, all of these others are personal computers as well, but that's IBM kind of standard became like also an adjective, so that it's a PC compatible software. So
right.
back in these days, remember, all of the software was specific to the computer. So even though the Apple Lisa or Macintosh would run on the Motorola 68K, the Amiga software would be different. You couldn't run the same software on both computers, or right, Atari or anything else. So
right,
so it was kind of important for like back in those days. Where would you go to buy software? Well, you go to a store, and in that store there are different sections for PC compatible, Amiga, Atari, Commodore 64, Macintosh, and so on. And all of the software boxes would have a big label on them telling you, which computer system they are compatible with.
Whereas
so with
nowadays,
PC,
you can kind of, if you have access to virtual computers, which we will talk about later, you can kind of run from your Mac anything. But yeah,
exactly.
so then, by the way, Windows 1.1 was referred by Mac users as AGAM 84, or almost as good as Macintosh 84. So AGAM, which is a
Let me
funny
just
fact.
quickly show you what Microsoft Windows 1.0 looked like, because you might think that it's something similar to what we know, but where do we have it? No, there should be some version history here, early versions. Yes. So this is what version 1.0 of Windows looked like.
Looks very retro.
Yeah. So not very graphical at all.
This is
And
straight
even
t-shirt
compared,
material.
yeah, though even compared to the early Apple systems from the same age, this looks old if you look to them at them next to each other. So it was really quite a horrible system.
Hence the term almost as good as Macintosh.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the computers from the 1990s at this time were has evolved a lot from the times of ENIAC, and they were 36,000 times faster, and they had a memory of 1,000 to 5,000 times larger memory, average between 4 and 20 megabytes. They were 1/30,000 of the size and cost about 1/30 of the as much in comparable dollars. PC at that time cost to 1,500, or today's equivalent went to today's dollars 2,500.
Yeah.
And so pretty huge difference to the computers we discussed in last episode. And so again, the evolution is very rapid. And then moving forward to early 2000s, where the microcomputers of early 2000s were 180,000 times faster compared to ENIAC, and they had memory of 25,000 times larger memory, on average 1 gigabyte of RAM, and one of 30,000 of the size, and it cost one of the 60,000 or as much in comparable dollars. The PC in the early 2000s went from $700 to $1,500.
Yeah.
So what we can conclude here is that the evolution has been very fast. The huge changes has happened in decades. What's I don't know, what looks weird or kind of like something that is hard to explain as someone who comes outside of the field is that how the evolution has been so fast. And back in the day, in the 1970s, I don't think anyone kind of knew where it would go, how fast it would go, how fast it would evolve. And it still did evolve. So everybody was kind of like in dark, but evolving very fast, which is something that's I don't know. Has the technology in any field compared to computing field evolved this fast, this rapidly, this in this scale?
It's kind of hard to say, right?
It's hard to say, right?
We're comparing apples to oranges, right? But the kind of the reason why I'm showing you this picture is that this shows you the number of transistors on a microchip during different years. So we have the Intel 4004 down here at the bottom left. That's the one that we talked about being the first mass-produced microchip. So it had like, I don't know, 1,000 or something transistors on it. And the current CPUs have 50 billion transistors on them compared to 1,000.
Right. And the time between
50 years
from the first to today's CPUs is 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's really
so this is an exponential gain, right? So the Moore's law says that the number of transistors on microchips doubles every 2 years. It kind of roughly means that the speed doubles every 2 years. And in the beginning, that doubling, of course, is fairly slow. But then once you double the doubled sum over and over again, it starts to escalate really quickly.
Right. And kind of like
and
the issues that
problems. Yeah.
Yeah. The problems that come into mind would be kind of the amount of technology waste that comes from this is straightly related to the fact that we have more, when we have faster technology, more people have, or I think, how would I say this? In 2022 compared to 1970, people have more access to computing power using the computing technology. And this leads to people kind of having a lot of computing technology and abandoning it once faster technologies are introduced. So it's like an environmental problem, and also kind of like the I think
fortunately there are some rare elements required here. So on a kind of IC board, there is gold involved and some other rare elements. So from that point of view, people are very careful with recycling, everything that they can get. So because there's money
that's
there.
a good point. I think that's something that is very important to note, that there's actually recycling happening, a lot of recycling happening.
Yeah, there is. So it's always important to bring your used electronics to a used electronics collection shop, not put it into the waste, because then it will go through the proper process. There also might be some hazardous elements in there that are then being removed so they don't spoil the environment. Another thing that is interesting here is that as we have more transistors, we will also eat up more power. Now, fortunately, simultaneously to us getting more and more transistors onto a CPU, we've also learned how to save power, right? So your kind of the current Macintosh or PowerBook, or MacBook Pro, I guess nowadays, or MacBook series are a good example of that, where the CPU has multiple cores and it automatically shuts them on or off depending on how much work there is to be done to save power. Of course, with a laptop, the reason to save power is so that you can work with it longer without needing to charge it. But then on the server side, we have a similar situation. And of course, there it's also a good idea to save power whenever you're not really needed, right? One thing that comes from this is that we know that this cannot continue forever. The problem is that the more transistors we put onto a microchip, the closer together they are, and the thinner the lines that go, the kind of wires that go between the transistors are. And as you might know, if we start to go into the very, very, very small world of physics, we start to get quantum effects. So
Right.
So
And
we
this
cannot.
this takes us to our next episodes.
When we're going to be talking about
But
quantum
we're going to talk
computing,
about
yeah.
it next episode.
But
Quantum
in this,
computing.
yeah, but in this case, it's more of a problem, right? Because the previously we said that electricity was like that there is a 1, and then no electricity was that there was a 0. But once we start to make these conduits very, very, very small, it starts to be individual kind of electrons that start to get sent there, and those electrons do not work in a classical physics way. So we start to get into problems due to that. Another thing that there is that there is more heat generated. So if we continue the same way, you can probably already know from like gaming computers that some gaming computers use like liquid cooling because it's so much efficient. Like the processors also get so hot that they need to have liquid going past them to take that heat off. And that's another problem, right? So if we continue this way, then in 10 years, the CPU will be like as hot as the sun or something.
Right. So this is
what we have been doing lately, instead of having a single CPU being faster and faster and faster and faster, what we've been doing is that we actually have multiple CPUs instead. And then they share the work that needs to be done. Now, this is not as efficient as just putting more power into a CPU, but it allows us to continue getting more power without getting into trouble with quantum physics or heat. Right? So
this is very interesting.
So there are these kind of physical limits that start to push the traditional way of creating chips, and this has already been known for the past decades. And that's why we nowadays see these multi-core CPUs. Like I just said, that your MacBook has multiple cores that are switched on or off depending on how much work there is. That didn't work previously. Like where we go back to the early 2000s with the Pentiums, that was still just one CPU. Yeah. So now you actually have like 8 or 10 CPUs in your computer or sharing that work. And that's also kind of sustainable on the longer term, because if we know how to share work between CPUs on one computer, then we can also share work across multiple computers. Of course, there's more distance, there's more time that it takes to communicate about that sharing of work, but we already kind of know the tools how to do that. And so a little bit about supercomputers. So traditionally, the supercomputers were these huge computers who had specialized hardware that would be able to work together on a very, very big problem. But modern supercomputers are just a bunch of normal computers working over a network together. So again, like literally nowadays, you would be able to gain access to a supercomputer just by going to your cloud provider and setting it up. Whereas previously,
Right.
you would have need to be like a country to be able to afford a supercomputer.
Right. This is, I think, this is something that I, after finishing this episode, you might want to sit down and relax for a moment to really get the information inside. There's a lot of information happening, and it's good to know that the scientists on the field already know that we cannot continue with this rapid growth. The issues that are there are known, and people openly talk about them. And in the future, let's see what the future holds, and maybe let's in our next episode where we tackle a little bit the possibilities of quantum world. Let's throw out the questions of what does the future hold in. And all right, I think that's our episode. I think we're done for today. Thank you for joining, and see you next week.
See you. Till then.
All right, bye.